So yeah, Talia Lichtstein, thanks for coming on the
That's
podcast.
right. Thanks for having me.
I rehearsed your name so I wouldn't mispronounce it like I did with a previous guest.
I'm very honored. A lot of people, I know that it's a hard last name, and I've thought many times about maybe changing it, but a lot of people just like don't even try. So I
Sure.
appreciate any effort at all.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Um, Welcome to the podcast. We've never met before. This is our first interaction. So and I'm sort of familiar with your comedy background. I know you make a lot of videos that have been catching a lot of heat and
Oh, thanks.
and whatnot. But for the sake of my listeners and also for me, can you just give me like sort of a little background about your history with comedy, and then we
Sure.
can sort of tiptoe our way into the corridors of grief.
Yeah, totally. I am a little hesitant to call what I do comedy just out of respect, being a huge comedy fan. I I'm not a stand-up. Like I'm so new to doing live stuff. I've only just started now with trying my hand at stand-up. But I got started with TikTok. I started making these videos on TikTok. They caught on and they were all I guess others would refer to me sometimes as a comedian, which makes my heart feel so warm. Because what I do is I just talk and it sort of is like little bits, but just online. But as I said, being like a comedy fan, I just like it's not traditional, therefore I like don't like to call it that.
Well, I
But
appreciate
if
you
other
making the
people want to say it,
distinction
yeah,
because there's probably purists that are like, this is not, but man,
including myself, honestly. Like
well,
I'm a bit
that's
of a purist.
well, it sounds
So
like you're coming in with a little bit of respect for it, but also comedy is such a changing medium. So if anyone's, that's nice that you're sort of gatekeeping yourself in a
yes.
way,
I
but
keep myself in my own little gate. But if
um,
anybody wants to let me out of the gate in their mind, I always welcome that. But
sure,
I think that yeah, it's just I talk and I make people laugh. So like I think internet comedian or internet personality is like a totally I'll accept that and I'll call myself that.
sure,
But I just like won't pretend to be like part of a scene that I'm not yet a part of. I'm
that's
just
that's
working
fair.
myself into it.
That's fair.
But yeah.
You said you're starting to do more live, or you're
Yes, I just kind of recently this year, not this year, it's been a month in this year, the last 6 months started doing stand up and it's okay. And that's a whole other podcast for you. But it's like
sure.
I'm learning and I thought it would be a good thing to sort of have in my repertoire, but I don't know if it's even my preferred medium. I think that I will continue to find my way mostly through writing and filming things. So
Sure. Go the
that's
Bo
kind of
Burnham
what I
route.
want to do.
Skip the
Yeah,
open
yeah,
mics.
sure.
Just go straight to Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And you're a recent transplant to New York, it seems.
It's been a year. It's
Are
been a
you
year.
are you liking it? Is
I
that the
liked it the
question
second
everyone
I
asks
visited.
you?
Oh yeah, and I love when people the best question people ask is like, "Oh, like how long have you or like where in New York were you born?" Like I love when people mistake me for having grown up here. I think
Does
that's
that
like the
happen
greatest
often?
compliment. Yes.
Wow.
And it makes me so happy. Just people
Sure.
stopping me on the street and like asking for directions like makes my day.
Right.
Um
And then you send them in the wrong direction because you're still kind of orienting yourself.
it's mortifying, but I always answer with confidence as though I've lived here my whole life and I just make them feel less
Just
than and make sure
just
to do
lean
that.
into it. You're not going to see them again.
Exactly. Exactly.
Cool. Well, welcome. Welcome to the city.
Thanks.
Um, I think that's enough formalities out of the way. Let's you must have some
Yeah,
sort of trauma for me to harvest if you agreed to do
sure.
this. Um,
Sure.
and yeah, you've listened to this before, so you may know that I don't have a set formula yet. I sort of
Right.
I don't know, try to just let the conversation go wherever it does. But yeah, how about just for the sake of a jump off, can you tell me, I don't know, your first real interaction with grief,
Mm-hmm.
and then
I for the record, just for a moment, I will say my favorite podcast and the reason I've liked yours is because you jump into it. I'm not a big fan of the whole I don't like pretending that people want to hear like structured, very high concept, like I don't know, like 5 minutes on this and like a hard 5 minutes on the next thing. Just these hard deadlines for talking,
sure.
parameters rather. I
and
just
and
like
that and this
I think you do it
podcast
the
is the
best.
opposite. We're a unstructured and low concept.
That's great.
um
It is, as I said, a great concept, but it's like it doesn't need to be this like, I don't know. I love the idea that it's not so structured. It's just, let's not pretend that people don't want to hear anything other than like talk about the subject. I think that's great. And
Right.
but
And it's
yeah,
not the most comfortable thing to do, but if you just sort of rip the Band-Aid off right away, you can start just let it bleed and then the
I
content
mean,
flows.
when you meet up for like lunch with somebody and you are just having a conversation with a friend, do you start by like giving the context of your entire life first for 5 minutes, and then only then can you start talking about what's really on your mind? Like, let's talk like normal people. We
Sure.
know why we're here.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
being
Old
said,
pals, united in grief.
let's do it. Yeah, I was very fortunate until age 21, I believe. I did not have really any experience with death or grief. I used to actually like say, I don't know if I proudly said it, but I would just say like I've never experienced a massive trauma. I had a very happy childhood. I can't point to anything that would have at least taken me in the direction of comedy. I mean, that's usually where these people come from, right? Is having had, an absent
Traditionally,
parent or
yes,
something
yes.
like
That's what
that.
a
Like,
lot of our peers are like.
right. I was very stable and very happy, and nothing really bad had happened to me until when I was, between ages 20 and 22. I experienced three massive losses, and it was just one after the other. The third being like the one that I'm sure we'll end up talking about. But
Sure.
until then, it was like, and this I'm sure will be a big theme going forward for us, but like until those, I had experienced death only in the context of like my grandparents, for example, who my dad's side, they passed away when I was like before I had a bond with them, really, which is so
Sure.
sad to say, but like I was very young, and I remember loving them, but like when I heard they died, I remember being really sad for my dad. And I was not sad myself because they lived on a different coast.
Sure.
They were old. It's not like they really, you know, I had memories to point to, and it didn't change my life. It made me very deeply sad for my dad and his family, but not me.
Right. Likewise for
So,
me and my mother,
yeah,
when she lost hers, I mean, her parents lived to be in like 86, 87.
right.
And even though I was like 20 when they died, it wasn't hugely traumatic for me because that's what people do at that age.
Right,
Um,
exactly. I think I had an understanding, and my parents did a great job of softening the blow for me. They explained like people get old and they pass on, and they were peaceful and happy and everything is okay. Like I don't remember a time when my grandparents on my dad's side struggled in their health. I have more memories with my dad's father, but like even so, I just like it just wasn't. I saw him maybe once a year, and then
yeah,
he
it's
was
not on your
gone.
radar.
It wasn't on my radar. So I guess I was lucky. Like I didn't experience a true unexplainable type of death, like a sad, tragic thing that wasn't just a part of life to me until I was 20 or 21. Um, and that the first one was the passing of my friend Ava, who was 16, and she passed from brain cancer, and I was her babysitter for many years.
Wow. Sorry to hear that.
And thank you. I mean, but I saw her frequently, and I
Sure.
saw her family frequently. And I also knew that she was sick for a very long time. So, in a way, that too was like, it was terrible. I grieved, but it wasn't like my daily life. I was also at college at the time. I didn't see her all the time anymore. It's not like my daily life was dramatically shifted. Um, she was not a part of my family in the sense that we would like do family holidays together or whatever. So like it was again a situation where I felt sad and missed her at the times when I would have seen her and didn't anymore. And it took about a year to 2 years for me to like stop feeling sad about it all the time. But like I was more sad for the loss of like that her family had suffered because they saw her every day. I was
Sure.
sad over the concept of her leaving, but I didn't like actively every day wake up and say like, "Oh, it would be so much better if she were here. This has affected my life so much," you know?
Sure.
Um and then there was the passing of, there was my dear friend's dad, Armando, who I had a nanny for who helped raise me, and her children were like my siblings, which I never had. I'm an only child. So her husband was a big part of my life in childhood, and he passed very suddenly. And once again, I would see him at that point in my life once a year. So while I did miss him at that time once a year when I would see him, and I felt awful and sad and was mostly grieving the life that my friends had with him, and I felt so awful being like associated, like parallel to that trauma, it still was like almost a feeling of it wasn't my dad, but it was terrible.
Okay.
So that those were two
Tell
major
right.
situations that
Well, it
were
sounds
like
like it's
that.
vamping up to the big finale, which
It's
was
vamping
the
up.
biggest impact. But
Yes. So
tell me
the point is I thought that I was good with death. Like I thought that I had
sure.
experienced the worst that life had to offer, you know?
All right. And then dot dot dot.
And then dot dot dot. My 33-year-old cousin passed.
How did
She was
that happen?
pregnant, and had a very healthy pregnancy and carried the baby to full term, and everyone was joyful and happy. It just came after such a period of excitement and happiness. And she had a sperm donor too. So she was a single parent, and she was so ready and prepared to be a mom. And she delivered a beautiful, healthy baby, with minor complications. And then later that night, rather, or a full 48 hours later, she passed very suddenly in the middle of the night, just before she was going to be discharged from the hospital with her new baby, due to a very rare infection that was transmitted during labor and kills, I think, 10 women in the US maybe per year.
Wow.
It could not have been prevented. It's very, or the only way it could have been prevented would be to do something before it happened, and there was no way to know. It's so rare. But once it's infected the body, the only way to get rid of it is like a hysterectomy, and there are no symptoms that are really easily detectable of that infection, because the symptoms of like sepsis starting are the same as, like, post birth. You're tired, you're fatigued,
Right.
so it was completely masked, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. And
Wow.
so she passed in the middle of the night. So that
That's
was the one.
devastating. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really tough. I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
And the baby's healthy,
Baby's great. Baby's
which
healthy. She's a
is
year and couple months old now.
I'm sure she's surrounded by love, but man, what a tough break for all parties involved. I'm really sorry for that.
Right.
Tell me
Thank
about your
you.
cousin. What was her name?
Leah.
Leah. Tell me about what she was like. Was she
Oh
a
my
funny
God.
person?
Totally funny. And in the most subtle ways, clever, a little bit snarky, just with the facial expressions and the looks that she'd give. She picked up on subtleties that you think nobody else in the room picked up on, and she was kind of sometimes the only one who did, or the only one who expressed that they did. So it's a missed quality, and sometimes it's easy to like feel alone when things happen and she's not there to like offer a
Sounds like
helpful glance.
you guys had a pretty tight bond.
Sure. And almost, I don't want to say it's we were not best friends or talking every day, but we were as close as a cousin who is 10 years older than you and you could be.
Sure.
We had a wonderful relationship, and she felt like a big sister for a person who does not have siblings. She's the eldest of three, or sorry, the eldest of four. There are three other girls. The youngest of whom she kind of helped raise, and because she was in her teens when they came about. And I mean, she was just like, she was a mom. Like from the day she was born, she was like a mom. She was a big sister, by definition. And like when the youngest two sisters of hers, who were both at least 10 years younger than her, were born, she really took on sort of a second mom role and helped out her mom in
Sure.
raising them. And she was like the ultimate, like, when millennials joke about like the mom friend, like that is so her, and in like the
Right.
least annoying cliche way. And she even had like mom like hobbies. Like she was really into sewing and quilting, and she would go to quilting like fabric conventions, and she loved travel on specifically Japan, and she would like go and find these beautiful fabrics and supplies in Japan and come back and make clothes and pillows and blankets. It's just like she was just like cool and herself. And she was very independent, but a family person who held tradition very close to her heart. And what sucks is that like she kind of felt like the glue in terms of family gatherings because the planning and the
Right. And if
she was
she's
just
like
like
the
a
mom
helper.
figure, usually that's the person booking the Airbnbs and like,
Yeah,
putting
I
everything
mean,
together.
yes, and she has a wonderful mom, my aunt, who also does all that stuff. But like Leah was very much about the sentimental aspect of things. Like we're going to make the same dessert on this holiday every year, and that was Leah's thing. Or like we have to do this. We have to go to this restaurant on this person's birthday because she always went to the same restaurant on her birthday. It's just tradition. And she was, we don't have the same grandma, but her grandma passed. She was very, very close with her grandmother, and my grandmother was her sort of great aunt or cousin. I don't really know how it gets connected, but she my grandmother's not like a very easy person to be around. She's not somebody who like people miss a lot. Like people don't really like die to go see her. And she lives in, a couple hours, not maybe an hour outside of Boston. And Leah like went and visited Boston once to like tour school and like nobody asked her to. And she took an Uber to like go see my grandmother and like
Oh
have dinner
wow.
in their gross little apartment. And it's just like she just would because family was important to her.
Sure.
And in a way that like honestly in our family like it's not that important to all of us, like she was the one who cared,
Yeah.
nobody asked her to do that. So she cared deeply about that stuff, and in a way that I don't, and I wish that I did, you know.
Yeah. Do you feel any sort of obligation to sort of like, if she was the glue, is there a little bit of like a ungluing among your family, or is this kind of getting tangential, not totally grief related, but
No,
when you
no,
lose a
no.
person who is that role, um, well, in my own experience, when someone dies, other people sort of become maybe more maternal or paternal, or just like sort of
Mhm.
change their relationship and how they are to people around them.
Right. I mean, I
Um,
can't speak for how her direct family, the three other sisters and her parents, their dynamic has really shifted. I don't know.
right.
On the outside, they're doing a great job of upholding traditions and keeping things together and sticking together, but I don't know what their dynamic has been. But my relationship to the family, I feel much the two younger girls who are closest in age to me, they've always felt like siblings to me and friends, but I have, I think, become a little bit more protective
Sure.
and into mentorship for them. I was a little older and I've always been bossy and like the big sis type person by nature with younger girls because I just feel like I'm missing that in my own life. So
Sure.
I like I'm sure they would say I haven't really changed at all, but I feel like there are times when I would otherwise hold back on like giving my younger cousin Jenna like a lecture about college or boys or whatever and just kind of drone on and on when I know I've made my point. And the part of me that misses Leah feels like I have to kind of stick it to her again just to make sure that she gets the point. Like
Sure.
tell her, give her the lesson, make sure that she's taking care of herself, even though she of course is. Um, but she'll tell me when I'm talking too much and acting too much like a mom. But I guess I just want her to feel like she has older guidance and role models that are not her parents.
Well, it sounds
And
like you are
yeah,
playing the role that Leah played for you, huh? Or maybe stepping into that.
I certainly hope so. Leah and I are so different in terms of how we go about like being the role model type. I have a very distinct memory of Leah like yelling at me for letting Jenna take a sip of my alcohol once at a party. Like she's very much like she was the rules person and was like, it's not, I was like quirky cousin and like wanted to be older, but like fun in a way that was like, I'll help you get a fake ID type cousin.
Sure.
That person, and
Like the
that was
cool
not Leah's
aunt.
style. Yeah, exactly, exactly. And Leah was cool, but that was not her style. She was stricter, but I do think that in a way she feels that like maybe like I hope that I've like done her justice and like making myself available at all times, and I've certainly gotten closer to the family as a whole ever
That's
since her
good.
departure.
Well, it sounds like you're being a little more conscious in like what you're trying to, I don't know, be in in regards to
Sure.
other people.
Yeah.
Um, as shitty as it is to revisit, do you recall where you were when you got the news about Leah? And
Yeah.
do you mind
No,
revisiting
not at
that?
all. Not at all. Um, it was the morning of November 24th of 2021. And this was a couple of days before I was supposed to move to New York for my new job. And I just graduated college. So this was a very exciting and hectic time. And I woke up and I remember that Jenna, her younger sister, the cousin who's closest in age to me, called me because the baby had been born 48 hours earlier. So she called me. And I was assuming that she was calling to see if I'd be at Thanksgiving or whatever. I got a text saying, like, can you call? I have really bad news. And she'd called a couple of times. And when I called her, I remember she was muted by accident. And I just didn't hear anything. And I thought I was being pranked. So I thought she was going to tell me the terrible news was that she wouldn't be at Thanksgiving or something. And I was laughing on the phone and was like, come on, pick up, like calling her a bitch. I was like, where the fuck are you? And I thought that it was a prank. And then finally her voice came back and she was sobbing. And I thought that I was like, oh my God. I thought that something had happened to the baby. And she goes, Leah passed away. I remember her specifically saying passed away, not died, because I don't know, like my cousin Jenna has such a sensitivity and such a tact for tragic situations that I think I don't. So she used those words, which I thought was interesting looking back on it. And, I hung up the phone and I went downstairs and I woke up my mom. And I remember my mom first thing she asked me was, am I dreaming? Like she thought she was still asleep. And I was like, no. And my first instinct was to go to them. But my mom and I are both the same type of person where we're like, if God forbid something happened to me, for example, my mom would never want people rushing over to the house. She is a solo coping person. And so am I. I don't want people rushing towards me. I don't know how I'd feel at that moment. And hopefully I never do. But like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
so
totally.
her first instinct was not to go there. And I remember like kind of fighting with her and saying, we have to go. And she was like, no. We have to let them ask for us to come.
Let it breathe.
Yes. So that was the day. And then the next morning, I felt like that was like when my mom and I decided it would be fine. And I still carry a little bit of guilt with me for not going sooner. But people interpret things differently. And I did not interpret it as an invitation to come over. But, Jenna did. So that's something that I feel guilty about. But yeah, that was the day. And
Do you
I
think
thought that
that's,
was like,
I'm sorry, you
go ahead.
Well, I feel like a lot of people have internalized grief around guilt and things that they could have done, and I wonder if it's only exists in their head. Do you feel like Jenna would have appreciated if you would come sooner or something? Like, I know some people who have lost people, and they specifically told me, "Don't come. I have so much I need to deal with that your presence would be appreciated, but it won't help." And I'm just wondering if some of that guilt maybe exists. Maybe it's a bit more exaggerated in your own mind.
It probably is because she has not expressed to me. She's made sure she would never guilt trip me about such a thing. But I think that we both talked about like my first thing I did when I saw them was like, I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, and they never made me feel bad about it. But I just felt like immediately it was like the wrong choice after experiencing. Of course, it's the death of a daughter and a sister and whatever, and a new mother. It was the most tragic thing that could ever happen, and it was almost so big that I had not wrapped my head around it.
I don't think it's possible to.
Yeah, it's not
within that time parameter. It takes
so
a long time.
How could I know in 24 hours like what the scene would be like at their home and what I was walking into and what people's thoughts and feelings were like? I had not processed it. And at that point, I had not seen her body or anything. Like, I did not think that it had happened. And so when I went over there, I was like struck by the grief and was oh, I should have been here much earlier. And so that's something I tried to express, but she never guilted me. But yeah, it probably is more in my head than it is in hers or theirs. But, I try not to feel too bad about it, but yeah, it's something that kind of bugs me. Oh, sorry. Somebody started calling me.
You're good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's, I feel like a lot of people have weird neuroses and like sort of guilt that they hold on to, myself included. And I'm like, if I can My friends are dead. We were always good friends. They're not, beyond the grave lamenting that I didn't do this or that.
Right.
I assume maybe they're in hell looking up at me, just being like, ugh.
Right.
Um,
I have so much. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but yeah, I have that thought a lot of like, what is she thinking of how I'm coping and what would she think about me doing this podcast, whatever. I would like to think that she is not. She loved me very unconditionally, and she was a source of one of the few sources in my life I attribute like her the feeling of love from her did feel very unconditional as opposed to like some of the people in my life who it doesn't. Um, so I like to think that like however I choose to cope, whether it be to go to therapy, whether it be to like talk to a stranger on Zoom, whether it be how I'm talking to Jenna and like how I've talked to my cousin since, like I always wonder like would she be proud or upset? And I find that just like knowing her, I don't think that she would care what I did as long as it helps me.
yeah,
Um, so that's my hope.
not to speak on behalf of someone I've never met, but I think she'd probably be happy to see that you're striving and also that you're able to talk about it, because
Yeah,
it's one of those things that a lot of people just sort of bury until they die. And then
right,
it's kind of, that's one way to deal with the thing, but
right,
I feel like I like to unpack it. And grief's another thing where it sort of kind of comes in waves. There's delayed aftershocks, at least for me.
right.
Um, a question I usually ask: do you remember the first time that you laughed after Leah passed on, or
I don't
was there?
remember exactly what it was, but I remember laughing like really early, like hours later.
Sure,
I think I'm like a person who really I never thought that I had like dark humor and I don't make jokes around her passing and like how she passed or anything like that, but I do like look for a joyous, funny thing to mention. I was really into telling funny stories about her rather than like really sweet ones that sort of induced more tears. I had a couple funny stories that involved like my humiliation and her being present for it and coping with it, helping me cope with it. Like things like that. I liked sharing about that. And I remember the night that we went over there, maybe it was a couple nights after, we spent probably a week straight over there at their house. There was one night where we were all sitting around the table and chit chatting, and my aunt and uncle were obviously like I just like overcome and not really speaking, but just quietly listening. And I just felt like maybe this would be a good time to have a light conversation about something completely different. I remember telling them some story about a guy that I dated and like a crazy thing that I did and got a couple of people in the room laughing. To this day, I don't know. Maybe it was like a pity laugh. Maybe it was an uncomfortable laugh. Maybe it was really helping. I just
sure.
felt that it was like, how much longer can we sit here and discuss the legal proceedings of the adoption of the baby and other things like that are not fun to talk about. I just like I don't want to talk about the baby's health insurance or we didn't know how Leah passed for like a month after, so I didn't want to sit and like keep theorizing about what had happened. And I
Mm,
just my mom and I both I think brought some humor. And again, that's another thing that I don't know if that helped or not, but I like to
sure.
think that maybe it did. It certainly helped me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how the things that people do just to sort of distract themselves. Um, the morning my father died, like an hour later, me and the rest of my siblings and my mom went for a hike in the woods.
Really?
And we even bumped into some other hikers and we're like, hey, we're not usually all together. Let's take a fucking family photo.
No
So
way.
we straight up have a family portrait of all of us 2 hours after my dad died. And
Were
I'm
you
just like,
smiling?
I don't really revisit that picture. And some of my siblings were wearing sunglasses. I think I was smiling, but my God, there was pain behind my eyes. And I'm like,
Right.
and you know what's funny? I hadn't even thought of that until like right now. And I'm like, what the fuck were we thinking?
Right.
Uh, and then I borrowed my friend's skateboard and I went to the skate park and like was like, I'm gonna relearn some tricks because I was like, oh well, this certainly helps me not think about reality,
Right.
Um,
Right.
but what a bizarre reaction. Um, and then of course I did drink quite a lot because that was
Yeah.
the coping mechanism at the time.
Uh-huh.
not like now. But it is strange just the ways that you're whether it be talking about a funny story or just doing something physical. I wonder what the psychology behind our bodies just being like, hey, I got to get something else going on in my.
I would love to know. That night also, we went, like, my cousin and I and her friend went for like a drive to Pinkberry or something, and I think we were giggling a lot in the car. I have pictures
Yeah,
actually from that
sure.
night. I took pictures of us laughing in the car, and I think I was just looking for, like, I had this weird thing where I did kind of want to document for myself, at least for my own. I don't know why, but I wanted to document the days following her passing and all the time that we spent at their house together. I took a couple photos just of the baby and of us all hanging out together, even if they were terribly sad photos. I have photos of us after the funeral just sitting and holding the baby. And it's like none of us are smiling. Nobody's happy. But I think I just, like, I needed to be able to look back and, like, remember.
Yeah.
It felt like I the sooner I forgot about that trauma, the sooner I would forget about her. And, like, I just, like, kind of, it was a bizarre situation that I could not comprehend, that we were celebrating the arrival of this beautiful baby who we were all thrilled was there and we had waited 9 months for and whatever. And, like, so it was a joyous week while simultaneously being the worst week. And it was like, I felt like I have to document so that, the baby can see that we were happy that she was here, but also really sad this week. And I don't know. I was obsessed with taking photos. I took so many photos of the kid and
I
just,
think that's
like, yeah.
I think that's really fucking important because memory is so subject to change, especially when it's immediately before and after such a fucking horrible event that
Right.
it is nice to sort of have some sort of receipts or like not even receipts, just being like, oh, this is what we were doing. Oh yeah, we laughed. I don't even know what we were laughing about. That
Right.
type of thing.
Right.
And in your particular instance, I can't even imagine the juxtaposition of welcoming new life while such an unexpected loss at the same time. I'm getting
No.
numb just sort of trying to put myself in your feet. So
It is
uh
numbing.
it
It's so
it really
numbing.
fucking is.
It's a little too much to handle. And I'm not even, I can say it's numbing. I can't even imagine. I hate the, I can't believe I just said that because I hate the phrase I can't imagine. I think it's, like, literally the definition of I cannot empathize. I can't imagine what her closer family members, what her sisters and parents went through and are still going through, which is 20 times more severe than whatever I go through, which seems as severe as can be. So I don't know what they do and how they cope, but the confusion is, like, overwhelming. Like,
Yeah.
there was no reason. There was no rhyme or reason.
Yeah,
It
that's
felt so like a sick joke, and it still does. And I do feel often that she will return, which is a problem, but it's just like how, and the worst part is, and the best part is, we have this baby now who we love, who's a perfect baby, and we want her to feel how much we love her and how happy we are that she's there. And we want her to know this was not all bad because we have you.
of
And there's no
course.
other way we would have preferred it as long as we have you. Like, there's no world in which we would have wanted something else to have happened and us to not have had you. So it's, like, hard to grieve while also remembering, like, you need to show the baby the joy that you really do feel that she's here, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it sounds like the baby's coming into a very loving environment despite the
Totally.
circumstances.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I understand what you say when you don't like I can't imagine, but uh it does make me think, and I wrote this down the other day. There are some things that I have accepted that I do not believe. Like, you know what
Right.
I mean? I fully accepted that my friends are dead. I can't fucking believe it. You know what I mean? When I'm like,
Right.
damn, I know that I'm never going to talk to them again, but my brain is like, I can't. And that literally is the personification of I can't imagine. Like, I can't picture this person not waking up yesterday or
Right.
a year ago. But yeah, it's all of the language surrounding extending condolences or trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes does sort of, it's like, it does cheap, because I feel shitty anytime someone dies. I don't know how to say anything other than I'm really sorry for your loss. And I know it's not enough, but I think that's the nature of grief, is it's so unimaginable that the language around it can't really do justice to how devastating it can be.
Right. There were so many little phrases and things that I realized were common after this happened. And this was the first time, as I said before, when I was explaining those other two, that made me think that I was acquainted with death, but I wasn't. At that point, I was not their immediate family, those two other people who passed. So let's say the funerals that I attended for both of them, I was not a person that people came up to and said, I'm so sorry. I was there to grieve and support the family that I was not a part of, right? Even though it was my loss, I missed both of them. I was not the person that everyone came and said, I'm so sorry for your loss. Whereas when my cousin passed, I was part of the family. I was part of the funeral procession and whatever. I made a speech at the funeral. People knew to come to me and say, I'm so sorry for your loss. You are blood related. I'm so sorry, And only then did I realize there were all these phrases and things that I never want to hear again. And there's nothing that I can say, because most of the people telling them to me are fortunate enough to not have been acquainted with tragedy the way that I have. So they don't know how much it bugs me, and I can't explain it to them because it's just unfair. They're only trying their best, but they will one day know how annoying it is to hear sending love. I'm sending love. I just what does that mean? There's all these meaningless things that we think hold meaning. I can't imagine. I'm glad that helps you. It's all that proves that it's all different for other people.
Right.
When people would tell me I can't imagine, I'd be like, really? Okay, so sit and try and imagine. You're imagine your cousin died.
Yeah.
Now you can imagine. It's just I hated that phrase, and I hated even I used to always, when somebody passed, and I still instinctively do, when someone says, oh yeah, I lost a parent, whatever, I say, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. But really, what I try to put myself in their shoes and think, when I say, oh yes, well, I'm coping with my cousin's death earlier this year, I wish some people say, I'm so sorry, how? And what happened? And what did she mean to you? How close were you? What was that like? And that I prefer. And I feel that I can spot people who've had a serious death in their lives by what they ask. And I really do. That's why I like going on a podcast like this. It helps me. It brings me a lot of comfort to work through out loud. Here is what happened. Here is what feels like it's missing. Here was what she was like, and this is what our relationship was, and here is my life now. I like to do the whole shebang.
Yeah.
And
it's important to me to talk about. And sometimes I wonder, it's I don't want to fucking pigeonhole myself as the guy with the dead dad or the sad dude. But the other part of me is this is fucking hugely helpful for me. I'm starting to write jokes about it. And as you mentioned, you do recognize other people who have been through shit. So immediately after my dad died, I only wrote jokes about it, and I was just doing shows. And, I got off stage and the bartender was like, hey, welcome to the Dead Dad Club, and gave me a big hug. And I was like, cool. I didn't realize this existed. And now it's like, oh, cool. There's an army of us, there's
right.
So that's cool.
Especially in the comedy world, I would imagine. I feel like that's kind of a common thing.
Seriously. God, I was at a mic the other night, and some woman jokingly and accurately described most Bushwick white dudes as either being gay or having a dead dad. And I went up immediately after, and my first joke was like, oh, I was recently spreading my father's ashes on someone else's private property. And I was like, man, I hope I'm not a cliche by having a father that was mortal,
Right.
But it's also another thing where it's like, hey, if you haven't experienced it, you will. Give it time.
Right.
And
you will.
It touches all of us. It's just a matter of time.
A matter of time.
Who gets there sooner or later.
That's right.
I'm kind of first to the party.
That must feel good.
Right?
In a way. Do you feel that people clout chase over death? That's something I've
clout chase. Interesting. Maybe. I feel
I
like
feel that like when
been
somebody
weird.
dies, a lot of people like really are interested in like
Oh,
talking
all
about
right.
it
Yes,
online.
yes. I know exactly what you
Yeah.
mean because I and here's another thing. I experienced a similar thing to you as I've lost people that were important to me but weren't extremely close.
Hmm.
And I will cite comedian Raghav Mehta as an example. He was a friend of
Hmm.
mine. We both started comedy in Minneapolis. We briefly lived together, but it would be an exaggeration to say that we were like confidants. But you know, we
Hmm.
talked. When he died, there were people posting on Facebook just, and I'm like, motherfucker, you met this guy like 2 weeks ago. So
Right.
even posted like, rest in peace, Raghav. Never got to meet you, but I heard you were funny. And I'm like, well, part of me is like, that's cool that even people that don't know him are sort of extending his
Right.
legacy. But at the same time, I'm like, what? I heard people like mispronouncing his name when they were like
Right.
tributing him, like, and I'm like, that's bizarre.
I know I'd be pissed if people I didn't even like or wasn't close with were
Sure,
digging up the littlest tiniest interactions with me to exploit. Like I know that it's human, and I would hope that my friends do. This is a thought that comforts me whenever I think about like maybe I'm coping wrong or in a way that she doesn't want me to or whatever. I if I were to pass on, I would hope that my friends would do literally whatever they wanted to cope with it. Like talk about it to whoever, don't make a fucking TV show about it. I don't care. Like whatever helps you, as long as
right.
it's not like Dateline and if I'm murdered, keep me off of those true crime
Oh
podcasts, please.
no.
Only my friends are allowed to profit off of my passing and benefit from my passing for clout, whatever.
Sure.
Um, but I would hope that yeah, my friends and my family and the people who know they were close to me and that I loved, of do whatever you need to do. But like people that I talked to twice, like I don't know. It would not make me happy. And I think that people are sort of, it's like tragedy porn. People are like desperate to be close to whatever happened. And I found that like when my cousin passed on, I hesitated to even post online, but I had this thing where I wanted people to know about her, and it really felt good to like tell somebody. It was just shouting into the void, and it felt good to share anecdotes that maybe her family and friends would read, that her daughter would someday read and know that I grieved and that I remembered her mom and that I had this to say about her. I want her to see that on a permanent forum.
Sure.
But I felt weird because I was like, what if people start DMing me, which they did. People who met her once. Oh, I knew her. Like I met her briefly, blah, blah, blah. And like sharing a photo. And
Right.
it's just like, I feel like you just want to be, people use it. Other family members who didn't really know what happened, who weren't so close, called and said, what happened? Trying to theorize about what happened, like medically. And it's like,
Sure.
I feel like you just want to talk about it because it's like tragedy porn. Like it's crazy to think about.
It
So
really
you
is.
want to
Yeah.
be close to it. And it's
It's it's
like,
a, it's kind of like, I don't want to name any names, but I know some older people in my life whose entire gossip currency is, did you hear what happened to so and so?
right,
Oh, and their daughter got hit by a car, and then you're like,
right.
what? I don't know who the fuck these people are. How is this your conversation
Why
material?
is it yours? I remember a very sobering moment was like exactly 6 months after her passing. So I moved to New York. I pushed back my moving and my job by like 2 weeks, and I moved to New York right after, which I still don't know was if it was good or bad for me. Because I think if I had stayed in LA, I would have like literally continued to spend every single day at their house playing with the baby and feeling close to them. And I moved here and kind of isolated myself and coped on my own for the rest of it while they were all together, which kind of felt weird. But so I don't know what that did, but I had a very difficult emotional transition to New York just because of what had happened. It felt like not only was I moving to a new city and transitioning to like adulthood after college, but I was transitioning to an entirely new worldview because this death like warped my idea of like what are we even doing here? Like it was so maddening and like made me think like what is the point almost. So
Yeah.
I was like reckoning with all of that. So it was a tumultuous couple of months, and towards the end of that worst period of it, there was this guy who I think worked with was like tangentially somehow through his career knew who my uncle was. And I said, "Oh, you work at this company. Do you know who blah 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 is?" It's my uncle. And I said, "It's my uncle," you know? And this guy goes, "Oh my God, did you hear about his daughter? That is crazy." And I
Oh
just
my
can't believe,
God,
do
did
you
you
know
hear
what
about your
happened? Like,
cousin?
I'm like, yeah, I heard about his daughter. I just told you he's my uncle. And this guy was an idiot. And he's just like, that's insane. We've all been wondering, like, what happened? Like, oh my God, it's all anybody could talk about for weeks. And I'm like, yeah. And then he finally was like, how did you know her? And I'm like, yeah, we're
Yeah.
related. He's
Yeah.
my uncle. Therefore,
Only
that is my
since birth
cousin.
have I known this
I've
person.
known her since I was very young. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And it was one of those stupid, like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, like, shit. And it was just sort of, are you sorry for my loss? Are you sorry for like making her death a gossip thing? Like,
Totally.
the fact that you said it to my face after I told you that I was related to her, it tells me a lot about what you talk about when you're with people who are not related to her.
Sure. It's
And
just speculative fucking grief voyeurism is mostly what
yeah,
it is. Uh, very bizarre.
it is. And I will not make myself immune. Like, I participate in that from across the world sometimes, and I forget because I don't know these people that they are real and their families are really grieving. These Idaho murders, for example, I meet up with my friends and we'd sit and be like, did you hear about the Idaho thing and these college
Right.
students and what happened? And it's like,
We're
we
all gonna
have
watch.
to,
Oh, excuse me. We're all gonna watch that documentary when it comes out in
of
5 years.
course we are.
You know
And
we
it's,
are. But
I
those
would,
are real
it's
people.
human.
Yeah.
It's human. But if somebody, and of course, a quadruple homicide is not like what happened to my cousin or any of my friends that I mentioned, but like, if anybody were to like make something about that was like fodder for gossip and discussion, like a book club, I would be livid.
Sure.
But I will participate in it when it's not somebody that I love.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
you know what I mean?
it's like when Kobe Bryant and his daughter fucking died, all those EMTs took photos and like shared it. And it's
Oh,
like,
that is
what
like
is going on?
beyond.
Like,
Oh my
what would
God.
you even want to document? How would that not already be burned into your memory of
Oh,
seeing?
I would hope that I was not
See, I
on that
need.
case.
It's just so strange to be like, this is so crazy. I need somebody
Right.
else.
I would pray to God that nobody called my ambulance to come and do that and help with that. Like, I would not want to see that. I
Yeah.
don't know how people do.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Very
disgusting.
strange. Fucking grief, man. Who needs it? Actually, actually, now that I think about it, it's probably a really vital part of life that I don't really understand. But
That's right.
yeah. Well, what else can I squeeze out of you?
I mean, hey, I'm here.
um,
Whatever you want.
well, rest
I
in
hope I
peace,
didn't screw up
Leah.
by not wearing headphones.
That's only for your own purposes. It wouldn't affect
Okay.
the recording.
Okay, good.
What if you hadn't heard anything I said this entire time and you're
And I
just
just went
lip
off.
reading?
That sounds like me. I can just talk forever.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. Well, I think that was good. I think that was a nice conversation.
Yeah.
I give approval to this thing that I just did.
Yeah.
That we
I
just
mean,
did.
if anybody's out there dealing with something, I don't know. My advice would be try and stop thinking about like what's the right way and who you're going to please
Sure.
by the way that you're talking about it. There's no right way. And nobody from beyond the grave is, I still reckon with this, nobody from beyond the grave is disappointed in you. Nobody's
Cosign.
harboring resentment or wishing that they spent more time with you or whatever once they're gone. I like to think that all my cousin and my friends care about is that I am happy and at peace, and I don't think that she would give a flying fuck where or what I talked about. But I still reckon with like, am I talking about her enough? Am I talking to my cousins enough?
Sure.
So try not to do what I do. Is my advice.
No, it sounds like you're a very empathetic person, and that's good advice. I could probably could heed that as well.
Yeah.
I would say let go of guilt if you are able to. Not you, just people in general.
Yeah.
And you also let go of that.
For sure.
Cool. Where can people find you?
Oh, you can just find me on Instagram and I'll post about this. Talia Lichtstein, that's me.
It does feel pretty disingenuous to be like, all right, now
Yeah.
where can people?
Tell me about the worst moment of your life and also plug your stuff.
Yeah. Um, cool. Well, I appreciate your time. I think that's all I got for you. Unless you have
Sure.
any
I mean, thanks
any
for having
final
me.
traumas to volunteer.
I luckily that's it for now, but
All
come back
right.
to me in 10 years. I'm sure it'll get worse.
Jesus. Yeah, part two.
Part two.
Cool.
Of
Well, thanks so much for your time, Talia. Appreciate
course.
it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks
Yeah.
for this great podcast idea.
Thank you. I appreciate you for listening. All right. Be well. Take care.
Peace out.